I want to begin by remarking on something, which is the presence of this individual we're going to talk about this evening, Zheng. Why are we giving a talk on him at all? When I was at school, he didn't feature. Christopher Columbus was in our global Ferdinand Magellan was in our accounts of the discovery of the world. It was even occasionally mentioned that there might have been some Arab Muslim explorers who were significant too. I don't recall Ibn Battuta, who's next week's topic, being mentioned by name, but I think we were given some sense that that people like him might have been significant. But nobody ever mentioned Zheng. So what's changed? Well, one reason why they perhaps, one excuse for not mentioning him is he's not actually an explorer. He was covering routes, he was traveling, his 7 expeditions were covering routes that had already been covered by people in the previous century coming the other way. Ibn Battuta, who I just mentioned, is the Moroccan explorer who is the subject of the next session of this sequence of talks, came the other way and reached China 100 years previously. So in that sense, perhaps one reason for excluding Zheng from these visions of human understanding of the shape of the world is that Zheng was not an explorer in that sense. But I think there are some better reasons why things have changed, why now you can't have a series of talks about great navigators or great expeditions, great maritime expeditions, without mentioning this individual. One, of course, is China's rise. When I first went to China in the 90s, China's growth, China's future dominance was a confident but still hazardous prediction. It's now evidently come to pass. That change is one reason why Chinese representatives of any particular category of person, be it explorer or others, are now more likely to feature. Something else that's happened is an anniversary. 1405 was the date of the command for the first of these 7 expeditions to take place. The 600th anniversary of that first expedition happened, of course, in 2005. And that anniversary marked the start of what one might want to refer to as Zheng fever, an enthusiasm for this particular individual, which has still not really gone away. And of course, it's an ongoing anniversary. These expeditions continued over a 3-decade span. So we're actually still in the middle of the 600th anniversary of Zheng expeditions. Right now, he'd be preparing for his, 600 years ago right now, he'd be preparing for his 4th expedition. And there's one other reason why I think we're here tonight, and it has its comical side. And let me begin with a slide. Can I ask for a show of hands? I know it's dark now, but I can still see you. How many people have read this book? Right, okay. Actually, fewer than I thought. Nevertheless, even those of you who haven't are probably here because of this book. And that's not because this book gets its facts straight. It doesn't get its facts straight. The book includes a number of remarkable claims. It tells the story. It tells the very, very exciting story of Zheng, but it also embroiders it in various ways which the author claims are factual. It claims that he reached the United States, or rather the Americas. It claims that he reached Australia. It claims that he and his colleagues traveled to the poles, that they solved the longitude problem, that they achieved numerous other things that the sources simply don't support. But we do, although this book has very little going for it in terms of scholarship, it was incredibly influential. It sold very, very well, and a lot of people, and a lot of very surprising people, were taken in by it. The Economist magazine gave it a very positive write-up. The Library of Congress invited the author and a number of other of his colleagues to come and outline their thesis. My mother was taken in by it. And somebody who one really would be surprised to find being taken in, not a lot of people know this, but Hu Jintao, the Chinese head of state on a state visit to Australia, was also taken in by this book written by an Englishman in 2003. He said, when addressing the Australian Parliament, "The Chinese people have all along cherished amicable feelings about the Australian people. back in the 1420s, remember 1421 is the title of the book, the expeditionary fleets of China's Ming dynasty reached Australian shores. For centuries, the Chinese sailed across vast seas and settled down in what was called the Southern Land, or today's Australia. And there you can see, I think that's probably John Howard and his cabinet looking utterly bemused, wondering whether perhaps something has been lost in translation. But as for if it's in Hansard, so this was accurately this is the official record of what was said in the Australian Parliament in 2003, the year after the publication of Gavin Menzies' book. Extraordinary. So for these reasons, let me just diverge for a second. One of the bits of advice that was given to me before I tackled preparing for this talk was don't be too scholarly about it. Now, the problem is when we've got a book like 1421 that we need to take on and set, when we have a record that needs setting straight, we've got to be a little bit scholarly. So what I'm going to be doing tonight is actually trying to crack open some of the old books, unrolling some old maps, scrutinizing some inscriptions, and even looking at a painting or two, in order to show us how we know what we know about Zheng He's voyage. We're not just going to tell the story, but we're also going to show why Gavin Menzies and Hu Jintao and my mother were mistaken in thinking that he had actually reached the United States. We need to do a little bit of a very brief romp through Ming Dynasty history in order to get the background straight. The image you can see on the screen is of the Hongwu Emperor, the first emperor of the Ming Dynasty, who in 1367 overthrows the previous Mongol dynasty. He rises, by the way, from absolute poverty, unable even to raise the resources to bury his own parents when they died, throws himself on the mercy of a Buddhist monastery, joins a band of rebels, and eventually, through the successful military exploits of this band of rebels, rises to be emperor of one of the greatest dynasties the world's ever known, the Chinese Ming Dynasty. It's during his reign that our hero, Zheng He, is born. Now, Zheng He wasn't born Zheng He. He was born Ma He, so his surname was Ma, a common surname of Chinese Muslims. And Zheng He was a Muslim, or rather Ma He, as he began, was a Muslim. Not particularly unusual. There have always been, since Islam has been around, there have been a lot of Muslims in China, and also of particular relevance to our topic this evening, because of the role of Muslim navigators in both the earlier expeditions of the previous century. We mentioned Ibn Battuta on the previous slide, but also the role of those very same Muslim navigators in bringing Zheng He and his crew back towards the Middle East. Our next emperor, we're going to skip a few minor reigns, but one reign, we're going to skip one reign here and move to the Yongle emperor. Now, he was one of the sons of the gentleman on the previous screen, the Hongwu emperor, but he was not the legitimate heir. But the legitimate heir was a grandson of the Hongwu emperor on the previous screen, and his position was usurped by Yongle, who was his uncle. And it's during Yongle's reign that 6 of the 7 voyages take place. We now need, and it's because of the special relationship between Zheng He and this individual, the Yongle emperor, that the voyages took place at all. Not only was he a Muslim and therefore distinctive in that sense, he was also distinctive in being a eunuch, that's to say, a castrated male palace servant. And he was a castrated male palace servant of this particular emperor. Before he became emperor, while he was still up near Beijing as a warlord in that region, he recruited the young Zheng He to be, or rather Ma He, to be his household servant as a castrated man. The circumstances of Zheng He's castration are not entirely clear. It usually happened when children as a child rather than as an adult, and so but he entered Yongle's service in his teens. It's the Yongle emperor who grants Zheng He this surname, Zheng. So the surname is a gift from the emperor to him. So he ceases being Ma He, this usual Muslim surname Ma, and gets the surname Zheng. We need one more emperor, and that's the Xuan De emperor, the final one of our list. The last of Zheng He's voyages takes place under his reign. Okay, so there's our potted early Ming Dynasty history. Hongwu, the founder. Yongle, the great dynamic successor under whose reign most of the voyages take place, 6 of the 7. And then finally Xuande, who in fact dies in the same year as Zheng. Well, I've said that Gavin Menzies is mistaken, and I've said that there were 7 voyages, and I've said that they took place between 1405 and 1731. How do we know that? How do we know that, and how do we know that Gavin Menzies is wrong? Well, one reason is because Zheng told us, and this rather remarkable monument that I'm going to show you on the next screen, located down in that red circle down at the bottom, on the coast of Fujian province, just opposite, on the Taiwan Straits, tells us in Zheng He's own words the story of these 7 expeditions. And it's one of multiple documents that we're going to have a quick go at looking at this evening to show exactly how we know when these voyages took place, where they went, and what happened on them. There are 2 circles on that image, on this map. This is to help us orientate ourselves. Nanjing is the more northerly of those 2 circles. This was the Hongwu Emperor, the Ming Dynasty founder's capital, the first Chinese capital to be located south of the Changjiang River. The capital was subsequently, during Yongle's reign, relocated to Beijing. And in fact, the forbidden city that you can wander around today in Beijing is a legacy of Yongle's architectural projects in Beijing. But the capital for the Hongwu reign is in Nanjing. And it was in Nanjing that Nanjing remained the financial capital after the move of the capital north. And it's also the base for the starting point for Zheng He's voyages. Now, the southern circle is an entirely minor location on the south coast of Fujian. But in 1935, an inscription, a stele, a stone monument with an engraved Chinese text on it, came to light. And amongst others, Professor Goodrich of Columbia University, who was in China at the time, was able to obtain a rubbing of this, which you can see on the left-hand side of this screen. And it's got a lengthy Chinese text that tells us a great deal in Zheng He's own voice about his expeditions. I'm going to return to this document repeatedly, borrowing different sections. So I'm not going to give away about everything that it says yet, but we're going to begin with the bit that anchors us in this key story of the journeys of Zheng He out into the ocean. The barbarians from beyond the seas, though their countries are truly distant, with double translation have come to audience, bearing precious objects and presents. The emperor, approving of their loyalty and sincerity, has ordered us, He, that's Zheng He, and others, at the head of several tens of thousands of officers and flag troops, to ascend more than 100 large ships, to go and confer presents on them in order to make manifest the transforming power of the imperial virtue, and to treat distant people with kindness. There's lots to be said about this, but first of all, the point is that this entire text is in the voice of Zheng He. He's telling us where he went, when he went there, and what happened. The other, with double translation, is an interesting phrase. The point here is that you're traveling so far and into such unfamiliar territory that you actually require 2 levels of interpreters to make sense of the people that you meet there. So that's what our double translators do. And of course, many of them would have been travelers from the Islamic world who were experienced traveling to the Persian Gulf, which is where they end up. The other important point to note is that this is a military expedition. This is a large scale, 100 ships is the figure here. There are different figures for different text, but here we've got a figure of 100 ships, and several tens of thousands of officers, meaning soldiers. This is a military expedition on a vast scale. And the aim is also made clear, although one needs to read through the rhetoric a little bit, but this point about making manifest the transforming power of the imperial virtue, I think you can imagine what that might mean.